welcome back to System Source Museum. This is one of my all-time favorite places to be. It's one of the best museums around for vintage computing, and I'm really excited to be here. But we're here on a mission today because this is a Bendix G15 drum. It's the one out of our machine back in Texas, and it is crashed. This is another Bendix G15, and it has a drum in it that is not crashed. So our goal today is to take this drum, put it in this machine, take the drum out of this machine, stash it in my car so I can bomb back down to Texas and put that drum into the machine down there and get it up and going. But we have a lot more planned today than just that. First of all, some things have changed since I was last here. There's new displays, things have moved around. So I want to run through the museum again, get as much footage as I can of new machines and interesting machines that catch my eye. But also, today is an open house. A ton of people have signed up to come check out the museum and watch me make a fool of myself wrenching on a Bendix. And I am beyond excited for that. So we have a ton lined up today. But before people start showing up, I'm going to take the camera around and get some shots of all of the epic stuff that's in here. Well, not all, that's an impossible task, as much as I can. So let's get to work. And we're going to start off with the Univac 490. We took a look at this machine last time I was here, but it's so cool, I gotta look at it again. This 490 is a 30-bit word core memory machine with 32 kilowords of memory, which is a lot to try and figure out. What that comes out to is 960,000 bits or 128 kilobytes in modern 8-bit parlance. But again, that doesn't really mean anything because it's a 30-bit word. At any rate, it has a 4.8 microsecond cycle time, and all of that was in 1961. This thing was an absolute rocket ship, which is an apt choice of words because 6 of these machines were installed at NASA, and they had complete or mostly complete control of all of the data readout screens in mission control. Being such an important machine in history, it shouldn't be a surprise that it was designed by Seymour Cray before he left to co-found CDC. And yeah, that's the very same CDC that made the hard drives I so love. But they also built some of the most impressive big iron machines on the planet. This particular 490 at System Source, though, may well be the only surviving, nearly complete and original civilian 490 alive today. After cracking the door open, we can get a good look at all the individual plug-in cards. Each card is relatively simple with nice wide traces and a collection of germanium transistors and test points. Each card is wired up by hand on the absolutely mental backplane. These aren't actually wire wrapped either. Each wire stabs into a plug, meaning it's going to be a proper mission to get this big boy up and running again. But it'll be worth it to see these core memory planes storing bits again. The stacks of core are absolutely gorgeous to behold in person, and the little diode array on top is just like perfect. The whole design of the machine is absolutely gorgeous, and the devil is in the details. Things like the front panel are just beautiful pieces of engineering. Right next to the 490 is this very cool Univac 1218. As you can see, it's much smaller, about the size of a traditional full-height rack. The Univac 1218 is actually a military-derived Univac 418i from 1963. It is a fully transistorized 4 microsecond cycle time machine with up to 16,384 18-bit words of memory. Hence the name 418, 4 microsecond and 18-bit words. But this is marginally faster than the 490, but with a lot less memory, which makes sense as something like this would have been installed on a ship. It most likely would have been delivered with a militarized magnetic tape system, paper tape system with punch and reader, an 80-column card system, and a high-speed printer. And you can see that this one here at System Source still has its Navy Department tag on it, confirming this was indeed in use in the military. Right above that tag is the power supply, which pulls out on a drawer to give access to the fuses. This supply required both 115 volt AC single phase 60 Hz and 115 volt AC 3-phase 400 Hz
power, which is interestingly a common power rail available on military ships. Like the 490, it has a stunning front panel with a ton of blinking lights, but I really like these built-in test panels that look like little solderless breadboards. Let's open this one up and take a look inside and see what we're working with. The drawers have already been unlocked, so they slide open with ease, giving excellent access to the cards. And the transistor cards look to be about half the size of the ones in the 490, but the construction techniques are very similar. Just what a stunning machine. Moving behind the Univacs in the museum, I just always love seeing this row of IBM machines on display. And the one that really caught my eye this time was the DisplayWriter system. It's just such a well-proportioned system, it really stands out in the crowd. The DisplayWriter was a 16-bit system released in 1980 and sold primarily as a word processor. Inside, it's packing an 8086 CPU clocked at 5 MHz and up to 448K of RAM. It was capable of running UCSD-P system, MS-DOS, and CPM86, which is insanely capable for the year. Those specs actually outshine my Centurion mini computer, which would have still been on sale in 1980. The DisplayWriter was packaged with TextPack, an IBM-developed word processing package that was meant to be easy to pick up and use in a business. The DisplayWriter was initially a decent success, with around 200,000 units shipping within the first 2 years. However, the very thing that killed mini computers like the Centurion also killed the DisplayWriter, and that was the IBM PC. Ultimately, though, the TextPack software evolved into DisplayWrite, which was available for the PC and PC Junior, so the DisplayWriter lived on in software form. But let's be honest, the reason this one caught my eye is the epic beam spring keyboard. What is a beam spring keyboard, you ask? Well, in the 1960s, IBM had an incredibly successful line of typewriters called the Selectric. These typewriters had probably the greatest typing feel of any machine in history, even today. However, the inherent nature of the Selectric mechanics meant that the feel couldn't be replicated on a digital keyboard. The beam spring keyboard was IBM's attempt to get as close as possible, though, and boy did they ever deliver. They get their name from the way the key switches are designed. There's a flexible beam of metal that, as you push down on the center of it, it pops through the center point and pulls a capacitive pad away from the contacts below, breaking the connection. This motion of the beam means that the keys have a very distinct feel to them. And keyboards like this one often sell for multiple thousands of dollars because they're just that good. Anyways, let's hear that keyboard in action. Yeah, that's awesome. But so is the DisplayWriter itself. The big 6360 floppy drives are just a sight to behold. The beautiful green phosphor CRT with the Acco privacy mask. It all just comes together in an awesome little machine. One of my favorite new items on display is this little gem right here. This is a Wang Model 360 electronic calculator. The 300 series of Wang calculators was released in 1965 and went through several iterations. This specific one is a 360, which I believe is from around 1968. The 360 model is a specialized scientific calculator with extra storage, but there were several other models for different disciplines. There was a business model, a statistical model, multiple different scientific models, and even a trigonometric model. It is a fully transistorized desktop calculator with a separated keypad and display unit. The main box contains all the discrete transistor cards and, interestingly, can be placed up to 200 feet away from the keypad and display unit. Granted, this was early calculator times, so it's not quite as intuitive to use as we would get used to later with things like the TI-2500 data math. Just look at this page of example problems and how to key them in. However, much like programming a computer, the user has access to a lot of things that they normally don't have access to on a calculator. Look at example 24, 25, and 26 here. You can store different values in different registers and recall or change them at will. But if we're being honest with ourselves, the real party piece here is the display. Just look at those Nixie tubes. Just absolutely stunning. I love these. The keypad is equally excellent as well. Just listen to the clicky clicky. The keys also have a great feel, which is surprising given how minuscule the travel is. At any rate, let's crack open the calculator box itself and take a gander at the gorgeous cards inside. And one of those cards looks like it was a replacement at some point. That's interesting. You can just see some of the germanium transistors hanging out on the frontmost card here, but let's pull one of the cards out and get a better look. They plug into a nice backplane card edge connector, but just look at the beautifully chaotic artwork. Even the Wang Laboratories logo is a work of art. I would absolutely love to spend some intimate time with one of these someday in the shop. One machine I forgot to look at in detail last time was this genuine Apple I. The Apple I is an 8-bit computer rocking a 6502 at 1 MHz with up to 8K of RAM and just 256 bytes of ROM. It was designed by Steve Wozniak and released in 1976, becoming the first ever product sold by Apple. When I say designed by Wozniak, I mean the entire thing. The hardware, circuit board designs, operating system, everything was done by Woz. What an absolute legend that guy is. The Apple I was the inception of the Apple Computer Company, which, as we all know now, would become the largest technology company in the world. There were relatively few Apple I's made, and coming across a genuine one is a properly special experience. If you want to know more about the history of Apple, I suggest checking out the movie The Pirates of Silicon Valley. It's an excellent film and one of the more accurate representations of what actually went down. This particular Apple I is quite interesting though. The full provenance of the machine is known and it is an absolutely real deal Apple I. All of the parts are original with the exception of one Sprague capacitor on the power supply. One of these 2400 microfarad 25 volt electrolytics went bad and was replaced at some point in the past. However, the original capacitor was kept and it is still with the machine. And if we're talking about the original parts, I gotta show off that gorgeous ceramic 6502. I also love the little section at the top for 6800 use and the perf board section for expansion or modifications. But what's most interesting is how this machine was used by the original owner. They had it in this briefcase, using it almost like a luggable or portable system. The keyboard is very home-built looking, with little tags pointing out functions, and it was paired with the absolutely venerable Sanyo VM4209 monitor. The original owner also used the SWT-PC PR40 alphanumeric printer with it. And I'm quite a fan of SWT-PC stuff myself. I really love their aesthetic, even if most of it is out of my budget these days. Tech Time Traveler here on YouTube actually has a fun video showcasing the PR40 printer. So check out his video at the link in the description below if you want to know more about it. He does excellent work. It was really cool seeing this Apple I in person though. I love the layout of the PCB. It's just elegant. But I also want to use it. And fortunately, Bob came prepared. Just off to the side is an Apple I clone set up with a generic keyboard and CRT that anyone can use. I sat down and experienced Wozmon for myself. That's Wozniak's memory monitor. If I knew more about 6502 assembly, I would have tried to get it to print Helworld, but I'll save that for my next trip to System Source. And speaking of Tech Time Traveler, every time I stumble across one of these Seoul terminal computers, I can't help but think about his channel. I absolutely love seeing these things. The blue and wood grain is just such a great look. But I may be a bit partial as that's the exact look of my Centurion mini computer. At any rate, I learned about these Seoul terminal computers from Tech Time Traveler, so definitely check out his channel if these are up your alley. There is so much more on display at System Source though, like this Altair 8800B for example. It's such a clean design and it's fully functional, which is a sight to see. And yeah, those toggle switches absolutely feel as amazing as they look. If you wander around towards the back room, there's even more on display. All sorts of mini and mid-range computers and even a full-fledged linotype. I don't know much about these, but this one does operate, and Bob even runs demonstrations on it, which is truly a sight to behold. And speaking of minis, there's a few hanging out that I definitely want to steal, like this HP 1000 or this Honeywell 316 in beautiful red. And who can forget the Data General Nova in its extremely unique blue color with dasher terminal. Seriously, y'all, come check out System Source. There's so much stuff on display. It's awesome. But let's not forget, we're here on a mission, so let's get to work. I need to pull the non-crashed drum out of the machine, and with the open house in full swing, I was a little nervous about working on the machine with an audience, and apparently I'm also terrible at figuring out good camera placement, so thankfully Fred had me covered and captured the entire event on his phone. So thank you so much, Fred. But I didn't have anything to worry about working in front of an audience. Everybody was super supportive and really helpful, and we had the non-crashed drum removed in under 10 minutes. I let people check out the machine with the drum removed for a bit because that's a pretty rare sight to see. And then I set about getting the crashed drum back in place so the machine can stay on display at System Source. And it took a little fiddling about to get the bolt holes to line up, but overall it wasn't that bad. And in less than 25 minutes, we had the drums successfully swapped. And after that, I just turned the cameras off and hung out with everybody that came to the open house. I didn't want cameras and filming to be in the way of just being there in the moment with the people. And yeah, I'm glad I did it that way because I just had so much fun. Everybody that came, everybody that showed up, thank you all so much. That was just one of the coolest experiences of my life. I can't put into words how awesome it was hanging out with you guys at System Source. We ended up hanging out till like 11 o'clock at night. Bob ultimately had to kick us out because he needed to go home. But it was just oh man, what an amazing experience. So thank you all so much for coming to the open house and talking with Bob. Maybe we'll turn this into kind of a yearly thing, an Usagi Electric open house at System Source. I think that would be a lot of fun. Anyways, the rotating drum memory has successfully made it back here to Texas. And before I go stabbing this back into the machine, I do want to pull the covers off of it because this is actually the first time I've really seen inside of this thing in person myself. So I want to make absolutely sure that the heads and everything looks clean and that they're not going to potentially crash if we spin it up. And I also want to make sure that there's not any water spots or indication that something is on the drum that could also cause a problem. So I'm going to get the screwdriver out, we'll pull this cover off, then we'll spin it around and pull this cover off over here and take a look inside. All right, here we go. Last screw on the back panel here. With that one loose, this should just pop right off. There it goes. The cork was just holding on a bit. Yes, there we go. That is absolutely uncrashed and looks amazing. All right, looking close, it looks to be in almost perfect shape. I say almost because there's a couple of imperfections on it. So if we wheel it around, there's a nasty looking little, I don't know, piece of mold or something right there. And then again up here. I don't know if that's through the magnetic material or not. It looks like it might actually be, which is not good. But it's in the center of the drum, so it may not be a vital track, so we can maybe use a spare track or just work around it. Also, there's lots of like dust and stuff on this. It looks kind of gross. So I think we need to go through and clean it up a bit. It definitely has some stuff building up along the edges here, like right along there you can see some stuff. So I'm gonna get, I think, some IPA on a microfiber cloth and just give this a clean and really focus on getting these nasty spots clean. All right, the drum cleaned up really well with the exception of this single spot right here. That's the one we were worried about, and that is something through the magnetic material. So something got jammed or a head struck the magnetic material or something like that and went all the way through. That is unfortunate, but it's in the middle of the drum, and that is actually good news. And the reason that is good news is because the clock track is on the outer edge. That's the read-only track. Everything in the middle is a kind of working memory track. And there should be a spare head and a spare track that we can then tap into and use. But how did we end up with a hole in the magnetic material without there actually being a head crash? And I have a theory on this, and this is actually going to play a bit into my theory on how the other drum got crashed as well. I was really perplexed on our old drum because it had really nasty crashes on it, but every time I gave it a spin, the heads were clearly not touching. So I was trying to figure out how it could have crashed. And I think the answer has to do with different metals. Initially, I thought this entire thing was all aluminum. And when I had the crashed drum in the car as I was bombing around the Northeast, I stopped by a good buddy of mine's place, John. And John is a metal guy, he has a metal fab shop, and if anybody's gonna understand metal, it's him. So we pulled the drum out of the car and waddled into his shop with it. And the first thing he said is that this is way too heavy to be all aluminum. We weighed the entire thing at 67 pounds, which is really heavy, and some number of kilograms that I'll put over here or something. So he got really curious about what the material of the drum itself was, because if you look closely at it, it's way too shiny to actually be aluminum. So he took a bunch of measurements of the outer casing here, which obviously is cast aluminum, and based upon the density of that we know, we came up with the outer casing and everything weighing about 30 pounds, which means that the drum itself weighs about 37 pounds. And, well, that's too heavy for aluminum given the size of the drum itself. We took measurements and did some density of it, and the density calculations showed that it's absolutely 100% not aluminum. So we started looking up what other materials had the specific density we came up with, and we're like 95% certain that the drum is made of titanium. Now, the reason I'm telling you this is that I think this explains why there was a head crash on the other drum. Titanium and aluminum have very different thermal expansion properties. This makes perfect sense if you're building a vacuum tube computer that's gonna run hot. As the drum heats up, the titanium is going to stay very stable, but the aluminum casing is going to expand. That's actually going to pull the heads away from the drum. So Bendix specifies an operating temperature of like 50 Fahrenheit to 80 Fahrenheit. So anything above 80 Fahrenheit ambient in the room, the heads are going to pull far enough away from the drum that you're going to start getting data loss. So that's actually a really smart way to do it. If your machine starts to overheat, you have data loss, but you don't have hardware loss. However, the reverse holds true as well. If it is really cold in ambient temperature in the room, the heads can shrink and touch the drum. There's only 1/1000th of an inch of clearance between the heads and the drum itself. So my theory on the previous machine is that it was fantastically cold one day, and somebody went down and said, you know what, let's spin one of the Bendixes up to warm up the basement. And it was below that 50 degrees ambient requirement, and the heads had touched the drum. But that could also explain why we have a hole in the magnetic material of this drum. Thankfully, it wasn't spun up in that condition, so we don't have nasty head crashes all over. So that's a very long roundabout way of saying I think that's a titanium drum, and I think that's why we're seeing the properties that we're seeing and the condition that we're seeing of these drums. So the next step is to put it all back together and to get it back into the Bendix itself. There we go, new rotating drum memory installed into our G15, which means it's ready for the next step. And the next step is the scary one. it's time to actually wire up the AC outlet to actually put some AC power into this. That's scary because it's 120 volt, 50 amp. Now, the machine actually idles at about 38 amps, but I imagine for inrush and stuff like that, they recommend a 50 amp circuit. So we're gonna dive into that into the next episode. Hopefully we can get it all wired up and actually get AC into this machine, which means that all of the cooling fans should kick on, all of the filaments should kick on, and the rotating drum memory should spin up. At which point we can unplug one of the Canon connectors and see if we have a valid clock signal coming off of it. If all of that goes well, then we can move forward with the next steps of bringing DC up and seeing what works and what doesn't. So I want to thank Bob so much for letting me go to System Source Museum and steal this drum out of the machine that is on display. That is one of the weirdest but coolest experiences of my life. And I want to thank everybody that showed up to the open house. That was just a huge amount of fun. So I am really looking forward to the next steps with this machine, and I hope you are too. So I want to thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next episode.